Isn't Christmas the best time of year? I love it. I saw some friends walking in, and I said, isn't this the greatest? And they said, yes, I love it. I love it. I got to come in early this morning and just sit in the pews by myself, and I had the trees lit up. You wouldn't have wanted to be here. It was like 5. But it was a lot of fun for me, and I was sitting and just reflecting on what's going on this morning. And I knew we were singing this song, Miracles, and man, that song always gets me. Because, I mean, think about that. We get so caught up in all of our own stuff, don't we? And we forget all the million little miracles where God is carrying us from moment to moment. Think about those things that God has done in your life. If you just took a moment, the little things that God has done to get you to where you are and where you could have been, where you are now. The million little miracles, moment by moment by moment. And sometimes we get caught up. We've got bad stuff going on in our lives. And listen, I don't want to discount that. But there's some good stuff too. There's some good stuff too. And this is one of them. This is one of them, being here with this church family that loves you and is going to walk through everything with you. Being here in this room that's been beautifully decorated as a church family last week. Just little things like that where we get to partner with God and what's going on in the world. There are a million little miracles of good things. You can't even count them all. Christmas is the best time of year, man. You get to sit around and you get to be with people. You get to eat all sorts of food. My mom and dad are here in town, and so I like seeing them around the holidays. So, hey, mom and dad, good to see you. I love being with them. It's fun to sit around and just remember things that happen. And like mom will go, hey, do you remember when this happened and this happened? And I go, no, not at all. But it seems like it was a really fun story. I wish I could remember all of that. And you tell all the stories at these family gatherings, right? Like this happened. And it's the same story you've heard or sometimes like a million times. And you've told it over and over again. And even if you weren't there, you could put yourself there. I love those moments, right? I love those times when we get to come and to be together. It gives you time to reflect, too, just to sit and to pause, especially when you don't have to go to work that day or whatever, just to sit and to pause, maybe at the beach, maybe at your house, maybe at 5 a.m. in the church, whatever you want to do, whatever, floats your boat. You get to pause for a second. And you think about all these good things that God has done in your life, all these good things that God has given you in your life. But if you're like me, sometimes you go the other way too. You sit and you think and you can remember, it's easy to remember the not so great things, the bad stuff. I was doing this the other day and I was thinking about a movie that I really liked, and not because I liked the movie so much. It's a movie that came out a few years ago. It's called The Judge. It has Robert Downey Jr. and Robert Duvall in it, and how can you not like anything with them in it? They're both great actors. The movie was great, but that's not why I was thinking of the movie. It's because within the movie, there's this song that has always kind of been this really haunting song for me that meant a lot to me when I first heard it. It's a song called Holocene by Bon Iver, or maybe you've heard them called Bon Iver. Bon Iver, out of Canada. So Bon Iver, it's basically this one guy, and he has people come around and play with him. But he writes a song called Holocene. And so Holocene is written, when I go and look up all the lyrics, I want to warn you that there are some explicit lyrics in there. So listen to it after Christmas so that you're not on Santa's naughty list, is what I want you to. But there's this one line that I heard in the movie. There's this one line, and it said this, and at once I knew I was not magnificent. And the first time I heard that, I remember hearing it, and it hit me right to my core. Sometimes songs just do that. For whatever reason, it just hit me right to my core. At once I knew I was not magnificent. And what that meant to me in that moment, what it spoke to me in that moment was, I'm not the best at something. I'm not this incredible musician. I'm not this incredible athlete that everybody's looking to or somebody who's going to for advice. I'm not even the greatest speaker in the world. I'm not all of these things. I'm not magnificent. And it's hard coming to grips with that, especially as a younger person, coming to grips with the idea that you are not magnificent. And at the time, I wasn't exactly being kind and loving others well and living for Jesus in that way very well. And so that also hit me in there too. I went and I started looking up all the lyrics to the song. And when I was doing that, I saw where the guy who wrote it was writing about how this how this came to be, how this changed for him, what happened in his life so that he would write this thing. And he wrote this song in a pub on a dark and snowy night during what he called a dark night of the soul. I don't know if you've ever been to Canada, but I hear that it snows there a lot. And it snows for a long time. And when it does snow, it's also really dark a lot. Can you imagine being in the great snowy white north? It's cold, very dark. Things aren't going so well for you. It's easy to find yourself in what you might call a dark night of the soul. If you've never been through one of those periods in your life, good, you don't want to. But I think we all kind of end up there at some point. We're reflecting on things, we're thinking on things, and we almost get to a depressed state. Maybe not always. It's difficult. It's a difficult period. And he wrote that song during this period. And it always interests me that he came out with the words, "And at once I knew I was not magnificent." You know, a lot of us during this season, this holiday season, it's really difficult. Maybe some bad things have happened over the last year for you. Maybe some really tough stuff has happened in your life in years previous. And so this is just a really difficult time for you. So for the rest of us, we need to be aware of that, of the people around us, that there are people all around us, right, directly around us, maybe even in our own households, that there are people all around us, directly around us, and across the globe for whom this Christmas season may be a little bit difficult. There are people who are dealing with these dark nights of the soul, even now. We know coming out of COVID that depression rates have skyrocketed, and as a result, we know that suicide rates have also skyrocketed. Did you know that in 2019, I mean, this is before COVID, in 2019, suicide was the number 2 cause of death for everybody under the age of 35? And I know that just saying that makes some people squirm. We're not supposed to talk about that in church. But where else can we talk about it? We got to shed some light on these things so that we can help people who are around us. So we can love people well and walk through these things with them. Yeah, it's a tough time of year for a lot of people. Not even just people who are facing severe depression around, right? Because what they do is they kind of see no hope for the future, and that's what gets them there. When we talk about global poverty, let's talk about that. People all over the world who are suffering in poverty in conditions you can't even imagine, that you've never seen in your life and you don't want to. There are people who are struggling all over the world, and it can almost seem like a hopeless life for them. People who are living in war-torn countries who don't know how they're going to face tomorrow. People who are dealing with famine in their land. They don't know if or when they're going to get to eat, let alone their children. They're suffering, and they wonder if there's any hope for tomorrow. Well, about 2,000 years ago, the people living in the land of Israel were dealing with a very similar situation. You see, they were living, much like many people across the world, in a world that was occupied by a brutal foreign government with a brutal, brutal army. Because when you're a brutal foreign government, the only way that you can continue to be that brutal foreign government and occupying that land is to have a brutal army. So the people who were occupying Israel at the time, here's Israel down here, way over here, here's Rome. Rome was in charge of all of this that you see and even some that you can't. Rome was in charge of all of that. And they were known for being brutal because you had to be. If you were going to control all of this land, especially in an ancient context, you could only do it one way: fear. At least that's what they thought. You had to make people fear you. They had to know that if you rebelled against them or if you turned them down, that you were going to annihilate them. Down here, there used to be a city named Carthage in northern Africa. And they were kind of rivals with Rome early on. And they would go back and forth, and one side would win, the other side would win, then go back and forth. Eventually, Rome got down to Carthage. They sailed across the Mediterranean, got down to Carthage, got involved in some war down there. They eventually took over Carthage. They beat Carthage and they annihilated the city. But not only did they just level the city, they killed as many people as they could, put the rest in slavery. And then they salted everything within a 2-mile radius to make sure that things wouldn't grow back. They wanted to make sure that this city could never be rebuilt. Crops wouldn't grow because it was salted. I've heard stories of Rome waiting out cities for months and months, sometimes years, to try to take a place. They were brutal. If a city rebelled against them, Rome would go in, find the leaders, and crucify them on the road leading to the city. They wanted people to know exactly how brutal they were willing to be. So the people who lived in Judea or Israel, way over here at the time, they were scared of Rome. But on the other hand, they had heard these stories about a God who could part a sea. They had heard these stories about a God who could provide food just on the ground. They had heard these stories about a God who could do all sorts of miraculous things. And how this God had chosen them as this God's chosen people, and that this God loved them. So they knew all of those stories, but then their reality was saying, actually, it maybe seems like God doesn't like us that much, or that God doesn't exist. And many of them started walking away from the faith. They started walking away from this God of Israel. They started embracing the gods of the Romans and of the Greeks. If you remember your world history, Israel had kind of been supplanted in the region. They'd kind of had the other people's thumbs put down on them for hundreds of years at this point. First, it was the Assyrians, then the Babylonians, then the Persians, then the Greeks, and now the Romans. And in that time period, the Greek culture, the Hellenistic culture, had become dominant all over this Mediterranean world. I said, why not adopt their gods? They're winning. That's tough. That's tough. When you want to stay true to this God that you know is real and there and has been there for your ancestors, that your dad believed in and your mom believed in and your grandma and your great-grandma, you want to stay true. But on the other hand, look at this brutal army that's winning. Look at these brutal people that are winning. So they were dealing with a dark night of the soul as a nation, trying to figure these things out. Well, there were still some people who believed. There were still some people. Not everybody had walked away. One of those people was a priest named Zechariah, and his wife, Elizabeth, also believed. Now, Zechariah was a priest, and Elizabeth, just by marrying him, she was the daughter of a priest, so by marrying him, she had fulfilled her duty. That's what she was supposed to do. And by all accounts, they were righteous, they were blameless, they were good people. They were the kind of people that you meet and you go, man, I wish I was more like them. You know what I mean? Like, maybe I'm the only one, but I meet people all the time and I go, I wish I was as kind as that person. I wish I was as giving as that person. I wish that I would go out of my way and have as much hospitality as that person does. They were those type of people. Everybody spoke highly of them, except for this one thing. They didn't have any children. And they were past the age of childbearing. They weren't going to be having any children either. Now, that may not seem like a big deal to you, or maybe it does, but in those days, it was a big deal. Because what it said to the people around them and to the people it was happening to was that God had somehow cursed them, that they had some kind of secret sin, whether in their own lives as a couple or in the lives of their family members, and that God was taking it out on them. Like, here's how you know that somebody doesn't have it all together. They don't have children. Imagine being Zechariah and Elizabeth. You're wandering through life. You're going through life doing all the stuff you're supposed to do. You're being a good follower, right? You're doing everything you're supposed to do. You are religious. You do your prayers. You do your sacrifices. You do all that stuff. You are a good girl. You are a good boy. You're getting it all done. But everybody's looking at you like you're cursed. And maybe you're even thinking to yourself, God's mad at me. I don't know what I did. I don't know what my mom did. I don't know what my dad did. God's mad at us. So they're going through life like that. Now, Zechariah, as I mentioned, was a priest. And a priest in this time was part of a large contingent of people. So they had to split them up into 24 different groups. He was part of a division known as Abijah, or Abijah, however you want to say it. And the way they did this was they would split them up into 24 groups, and that division would serve twice a year for 1 week at a time. Kind of like National Guard for ancient Israelite priests, that sort of thing. That's what we're going to pick up today. Zechariah had been chosen during his time at the temple as he's serving to go in and do the incense, light the incense and wipe the ash off the altar inside the priestly sanctuary. Now that might sound whatever, that's what priests do, but this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. This was the room right next to the Holy of Holies where God was supposed to be. He's wiping the incense altar. He's cleaning up the incense altar right next to where God is supposed to be. Once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for a priest. Nobody else got to go in there. People praying all around outside. Nobody can come in that room. He gets chosen for this. That's where we're picking up today in Luke chapter 1. We see in verse 11. He walks in. Then an angel of the Lord appeared to him standing at the right side of the altar of incense. When Zechariah saw him, he was startled and was gripped with fear, as you would be, right? Like as you obviously would. If you walked into a room, there's nobody supposed to be there. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for you, and suddenly you see somebody standing there waiting on you. You're going to be startled. But he figures out real quick, this isn't just anybody. This is a messenger of God. This is an angel of God there to relay a message. He's afraid because A, somebody just scared him. Nobody's supposed to be there. But B, when you figure out this is an angel, anytime an angel, go look in the Old Testament, anytime an angel shows up, people aren't excited to see the angel. They're nervous. They're startled and they're scared. Because usually, an angel brought bad news. They brought judgment. And somebody, maybe you, might be dead pretty soon. Sometimes they brought good news, but most of the time it was bad news. So Zechariah is gripped with fear when he figures out who this is. But, verse 13, the angel said to him, "Do not be afraid, Zechariah. Your prayer has been heard." Don't be afraid, Zechariah. Your prayer has been heard. And what's that prayer? The thing you've been praying about more than anything. We all have those things, don't we? At different times in our life. I've been praying about this every day of my life, 50 times a day. I'm praying and I'm praying and I'm praying and I'm praying. Zechariah knew exactly. He knew exactly what this angel was talking about. But the angel says, "Your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you are to call him John." That one thing that he's wanted, that Zechariah has wanted all this time, was a child. He wanted a child. He wanted somebody to carry on his name. He wanted somebody. He wanted people to quit looking at him like that. He wanted the other priests to quit kind of turning their nose up at him and Elizabeth. He knew that he'd been doing all the right things. He knew that he'd been living right, that he was serving God with all of his heart. And he probably resigned himself that he's just never going to have a kid. He probably got to that place. We're too old. It's not going to happen. Somebody did something somewhere. But your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you are to call him John. Imagine you're Zechariah in that moment. All the emotions that are going through you, the excitement, that you're startled. You're scared, but also you're intrigued. There's all sorts of things going on through you. And now you finally feel vindicated. Like there's nothing wrong. I'm not cursed. This is good news. And this is great news for Zechariah and Elizabeth. But the best news is, it wasn't just news for them. He says, the angel goes on, "He will bring back many of the people of Israel to the Lord their God." Implication being that there are many people who have wandered away from the Lord their God, right? Like we can understand just from context clues that this has happened, and we know it from history that it also happened. He says, so John, this child that you weren't even expecting, is going to show up, and they're going to bring many people back to God. Here's why that's important in the way that it's phrased. Here's why that's important. Because the only people who are bringing anybody back to God, if you look in the Old Testament, are prophets. And there hadn't been any prophets for hundreds of years. It was generally accepted in Israel at the time that there hadn't been any prophets speaking for God for hundreds of years. You didn't even know if you were going to have a child. Now you're going to have a son, and he's going to be a prophet. Not just any prophet. He will go on before the Lord in the spirit and the power of Elijah. I mean, that's the prophet of prophets. That's the guy everybody wants to be like. This prophet was the one who was calling everybody back all the time. This prophet is the one who's making miracles happen and stuff. Like, you want to be like that guy. But something starts turning in his priestly ear. He'd heard this verse before. To turn the hearts of the parents to their children and the disobedient to the wisdom of the righteous, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord. So this son you didn't know was showing up, that you didn't think was possible to have, is going to show up and is going to be a prophet, and they're going to bring many people back to God. Going to bring many people back to God. And they're going to turn the hearts of the parents and the children. Sorry, can you go back one? They're going to turn the hearts of the children and the parents and the disobedient, the wisdom of the righteous, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord. He's preparing the people for the Lord. Now, as a priest, he would have known that this is a quote. This is a quote from Malachi. Malachi was one of the last prophets to talk. See, I will send the prophet Elijah to you before that great and dreadful day of the Lord come. There was a big day coming, a big moment coming when God was going to set things right. God was going to settle the scores and all of that stuff. And Malachi is prophesying on behalf of God, I'm going to send the prophet Elijah to you. Who's John supposed to be kind of resembling? Elijah. John's going to resemble Elijah. Malachi went on. He said this, he will turn the hearts of the parents to their children and the hearts of the children to their parents. Sound familiar? This is a big day coming. There's a big monumental day coming. Malachi wants the people of Israel to be ready. It was commonly accepted at the time that Elijah would show up, not before a Messiah, but before the big day of the Lord. Turns out the big day of the Lord that everybody's waiting on is when Jesus shows up. When the kingdom of God breaks into this world. That's the big day. That's the moment. And here is this angel telling Elijah, your son is going to be right in the middle of all of that. Your son is going to set the way, prepare the way, set the foundation for the one who's going to make all this happen. He's going to bring many people back to God. Can you imagine what's going on in him? This isn't just a good news thing for him and for Elizabeth. This is a good news thing for him and all of the people of Israel. And I imagine that he probably had this going through his head as he was leaving from Isaiah, another prophet, that the people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. Now, we're doing this in a series all the way leading up to Christmas. We're calling this series Light in the Darkness, because that's exactly what Jesus is. A light in the darkness. When everything seemed dark for the people of Israel, for Zechariah and Elizabeth, really the entire world, when it seemed like it was too far gone, God broke into time and space. God didn't have to. God chose to. God could have wiped the slate clean and said, no, we're going to do this on Mars or Venus or like Pluto or something, even though it's not technically a planet. He could have done that. But instead, God chose to break into time and space and love us and to bring us back. He chose that. You know, so many of us, we feel like we're doing all the right things, don't we? We feel like we're doing all the right stuff and being good girls and good boys and we're saying our prayers and we're eating our vitamins and eating our vegetables and all that stuff. We're doing all the things that we're supposed to do. And still it seems like we're getting a bad hand. We're getting a raw deal, aren't we? It didn't go my way. I've been praying for this thing for years. This ain't happening for me. I've been praying and praying and praying. I'm God's child. Why isn't God stepping in and helping me now? God can do miracles. Why doesn't God do miracles? Why did God allow that thing to happen? Why? And I can understand all of them. And so can you. But I think the lesson for us here is to look at Elizabeth and look at Zechariah and find some lessons. Find some answers there. I think so. A few lessons we can learn from Zechariah and Elizabeth here. I think first is keep on serving God. No matter what's happening in your life and no matter how difficult it might be, keep on serving God to whatever extent you can. Keep on serving God. It's difficult. I know a lot of your stories, and I know you got some real stuff going on. Keep on serving God. That's exactly what Elizabeth and Zechariah did. And so when the time came, they were prepared. They were ready to step in. They were ready to raise this child who was going to do so many amazing things in the world because they had never given up. The second thing is this. Know that your prayers are heard. Know that your prayers are heard. You know, sometimes when we're praying for stuff and we're wanting these things to happen and life isn't going our way, it can be easy to think our prayers are falling on deaf ears. They're not. God is listening. God may not be answering the way you want them to be answered. God may not be making things happen the way you want things to happen. But that's not because God is angry at you. That's not because God is against you. God is for you, not against you. It's because God sees things from a vantage point that you and I can't see yet. God sees things from a vantage point that you and I just can't see. It's kind of like when my kids want to eat cookies for breakfast, and they do want to eat breakfast cookies. And I say, no. And they say, why not? I'm hungry. Well, it's because you're going to have a stomach ache, and that'll turn into a big belly ache, and then we're going to have problems, and I want to take you to school, and you're going to be hyper and going all crazy, and I'm going to get it. No, we're not doing that. And they're like, but I'm hungry. That's food. 1 + 1 = 2. Let's do this. They can't understand. In a similar way, it's like that with God. We just don't always see things from God's vantage point. And if we did, we'd be making the exact same decision. Now, that's not to discount that there's some really difficult things that we're walking through, that some of us are traveling through right now. But it is to say that God is for you. God's walking through it with you. God hears those prayers. Here's the third thing I think we learned from Elizabeth and Zechariah. God may use you when you least expect it. You think Zechariah was ready for this? You think Zechariah was like, yeah, I saw that coming from a mile away. You telegraphed that one, God. No way. He didn't expect this at all. Elizabeth didn't expect this at all. But because they had been consistent, because they had kept following, because they kept going, because they kept trusting, they were ready when God did decide to use them, when God did decide to use them in that way. God can use you, even in the midst of your pain. Even in the midst of your hurt, even in the midst of your good times, God can and will use you. Be ready for it. Be ready for it. If you hear nothing else I say today, though, here's what I want you to take away. I want you to remember this. God can be trusted with our hope. God can be trusted with our hope. Now, I'm not saying that God is going to just give you the thing that you want. Give you the thing that you've been praying for instantly. I'm not saying God's going to just give you stuff, especially on your timeline. But what I am saying is we can trust God with our hope. We can trust God for the good stuff that God has for us. We can trust that God is always working for the best for us. We can trust that. Zechariah and Elizabeth kept trusting God in the darkness. When they didn't know what to do, when they didn't know what God was doing, why God wasn't giving them this or why God was giving them that, they could still trust because they knew that God was always at work. They knew that God was always working for the good with those million little miracles every day of their life. And if you were to sit and think about all the things that God has done in your life, If you were to sit and think about all the things that God has done to get you to where you are, all the ways that you have been saved from certain things, I think you might remember that there are very good things happening in your life and that God can be trusted as a result of those things. I want to invite you to think on those things and remember that God can be trusted with our hope. Zechariah and Elizabeth trusted God in their darkness, and because of that, they were the first to know when the light was breaking through. May the same be said of you and me. Let me pray for us. God, it can be such a fun and sometimes difficult season for people. I pray, God, no matter where we are today, that you would allow us to trust you with our hope. That you would give us the grace, give us the strength, give us the courage to trust you with our hope. And remember all the good things that you have done. Remember all the ways you've already proven yourself. Help us to trust you with our hope. In the name of Jesus, amen.